So as we all know, the Philadelphia Eagles were not able to retain Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, but through some cryptic tweets from his agent and from other news, we are hearing more about what actually happened. At first, I thought it may have been on Howie and this team just being cheap, but it doesn't seem that way. So let's talk about it.
You want Philly?
Yeah, let's do it.
What's going on, you guys? It's your boy Joe Castro, aka Philly Fresco, and it is Philly the podcast. Today is going to be a little bit of a special episode. We're going to have one part of the interview I did with Devin Jackson. This is going to be like the first half. I'll release the second half tomorrow. We got into a lot of good things. Devin Jackson works for the Inquirer, a good friend of mine. So definitely check that out after we talk about this Chauncey Gardner-Johnson news. Now, before we get into the news, be sure to hit that like, hit that subscribe, join the family. We are on the road to 5K, and we would love for you guys to join that ride. So let's start where we need to start, man. So obviously Chauncey Gardner-Johnson does sign a one-year deal with the Detroit Lions. I came on here, I was upset last night. I ain't gonna lie, I ain't gonna sit here and lie to you. I'm a fan at the end of the day. I try to give you real news, but at the end of the day, I'm a fan just like you guys, so I get upset. And I reacted how I reacted because I knew what I knew. So at that point, all I knew was that the Eagles didn't re-sign him, that he got re-signed for a one-year deal, $8 million, up to $8 million, I should say, 6.5 of that guaranteed to the Lions. And it felt like the Eagles could do that, right? So the news is coming out that the Eagles did offer him early on in free agency a very competitive offer, which he chose to refuse, which he chose to deny, and he just declined the offer. So he went out there trying to find something that was better for him and his agent. Shout out to his agent. His agent is very petty. Kevin Connor, I thought was... Look, I mean, I don't know if it was Kevin Connor. I'm gonna put it like this. Someone from Universal Sports and Entertainment, which I work with a lot of agents and agencies, and I only know of two people that work there. So it was either Kevin Connor or his associate. But at the end of the day, somebody went on the Twitter, released the information about his contract, him being Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. He basically asked, would you take the 1 year, $8 million up front, a real deal, quote unquote, is what he called it, or a 3-year, $24 million fake deal from the Eagles, and went on to kind of say that the structure was no guarantees, that the structure was terrible. Seth Joyner, I don't know how much he knew about the situation, but he was in the comment section talking about that it would have been 3.5 year 1, 3.5 year 2, and then 17 mil year 3, which he probably never would have seen. So I don't know if that's what it was. We don't know the structure. I'm sure a lot of things will be coming out over time, but realistically, I was wrong, and I'm very cool with admitting that. Howie Roseman did what he was supposed to do. He went out there, he offered him, he tried to get him, and then when he saw that it probably wasn't going to happen, he moved the heck on. And that's what you're supposed to do as a GM. That's what you're supposed to do in the front office of an NFL team. So I wanted to make this video. I wanted to kind of just make this update just to say I was wrong. Yeah, I should have waited till I got a little bit more information. I don't think this is on Howie. There are a lot of things that we can look at, and maybe we should have just overpaid him. But from what I'm reading, it seemed like we gave him a $12 million per year offer early in free agency. I think that second offer was something we offered as kind of all right, now that you're not getting the deals you want, this is where our deal is now, because we went and signed Bradbury. We went and brought back Darius Slay. So I'm going to miss, don't get me wrong, I'm going to miss Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Loved what he brought to this team. Loved what he brought on the field and off the field. But at the same time, it is what it is. You are no longer a Philadelphia Eagle. You probably should have made a better decision. Your agent probably kind of messed you over here. You guys kind of overestimated what you guys were going to be worth. It is what it is. No hate in my blood, no hatred at all. It is what it is. The Eagles have to go out there and find a safety. Now, before we get into this interview, let me know below, who are some safeties you're looking at? I know Bayard is on a lot of people's lists. I know John Johnson, I think, is on some guys' lists. There's some guys out there that we can definitely go and get. I think that the Eagles move in the way of a veteran, but we'll see what happens. So, no, we're not going to end this video. I know you guys are used to me just saying y'all know what it is. But fly, Eagles, fly. We out of here. No, we're not out of here. Stay tuned. I'm going to drop the first half of the interview with my guy, Devin Jackson, right now. What's going on, you guys? It's your boy Joe Castro, aka Philly Fresco, and it is Philly the podcast. Today we have a very special guest, man. We got my guy Devin Jackson from the Philly Inquirer, man. Met this guy out there at the combine. We had some really good conversations, so I'm kind of excited to keep that conversation going a little bit. But Devin, how's it going, brother? How you been?
I've been good, man. Just been really, getting into, we got a little over a month for the draft, so really trying to get everyone finished, and the guys that I feel like Eagles might be interested, took a closer look at the combine, taking a closer look at their tape, and seeing if it could be a possibility. So, really immersing myself in this process. Obviously, watching all the free agency signings and everything going down this past week, and just seems like every day was a roller coaster. So, really just taking it all in and watching every single move and seeing if they might be giving us clues to see what might be happening over the next couple months.
Yeah, and that's kind of exactly where I want to kind of start is getting the clues and kind of putting the pieces together. And I've been saying this on Twitter a lot, is kind of just reading the tea leaves, seeing what the Eagles are doing, seeing what they're not doing, and seeing what other teams are doing, and figuring out what that could mean for us. But I want to start kind of recapping, like you said, this has been, I mean, I don't even know if a roller coaster is, a good enough term to talk about how crazy it's been. But I want to talk about the new additions. Obviously, we've been able to re-sign some key guys. Fletcher Cox, Darius Slay was gone, then he came back. There was a lot of guys that we were able to bring back. But you look at guys like Greedy Williams, Marcus Mariota, Rashad Penny. A lot of people might look at the, two people that I said first as kind of depth pieces, but Rashad Penny is an interesting guy. I want to know, what do you think is their expected role for these new additions, and what could this possibly tell us about the draft coming up?
Well, it tells you the fact that they're on short-term deals, that these are guys that are kind of low risk, high reward signings. I would say, you look at Rashad Penny, he has the explosiveness to be kind of that change of pace back that the Eagles are looking for, and be able to break off those chunk runs. And the biggest thing for him is health. And same thing with Greedy Williams. Greedy, coming out of college, he was, kind of highly regarded, but in Cleveland, he's kind of the odd man out because of injuries. Obviously they got Denzel Ward, Greg Newsome in Cleveland, so it kind of made it a little bit harder for him to figure out a role. So I think, with bringing him in Philly, obviously it's a depth signing, but could he be a guy that could prove that maybe he's a longer term investment? Maybe not for the Eagles per se, but for other teams around the league. So I think those guys you look at both of them. Sure, they're probably depth pieces, but certainly they have enough talent and ability to find a landing spot, long term. So I think it's kind of a transition time for them, and it's kind of the same thing for the Eagles. They're preparing for some big moves down the line. Obviously, you bring back Slay and Bradbury. Bradbury obviously being a more of a longer term option. But certainly I think it tells you that running back and DB are going to be needs at some point in the near future, but you're bringing in guys that can compete, that could possibly fill out a role. And you never know, Greedy Williams might be looked at to, fill in if Slay or Bradbury gets hurt next year. So you want some sort of veteran presence in those rooms. Same thing with running back. We don't know how Gainwell will look with a kind of a full load. Obviously, they brought back some other guys in the running back room and has some guys that they stashed off. But I think both those guys in particular are guys that are low risk, high reward signings where you could possibly get them another contract that they fill out a nice role next year.
Yeah, definitely. I think Greedy Williams' age is very helpful in that regard, right? I think he's just 26, if I'm not mistaken, or hasn't even hit 26. I think he's 26 in December. Either way, like you said, if he goes out there and he has to, take over for a Bradbury, take over for a Slay, even maybe take over for a Maddox, who knows what happens there, and he shows that he can play, shows that he's a guy you can keep. We saw what happened with Bradbury. I'm excited to keep Bradbury. And that actually kind of brings me into my next question, because I don't think the Eagles, at least fans wise, I don't think Eagles fans really expected to get as many people as we did get back. So I think that it's a surprise in that regard. But were there any certain players that kind of surprised you that the Eagles brought back, maybe in a good way or a bad way? Surprised, like, I'm kind of shocked they even spent that money, or is there guys that you're like, I'm surprised he came back to the squad?
Yeah, I thought the market for Bradbury was going to be robust, so I thought there was a good chance he was not coming back. But I think it was more surprised me that he got a multi-year deal, that he came back, and not in a bad way. More so that they see a long-term option with him, and I think kind of the roundabout they went with Slay kind of tells you like they like him, but they know that a decline is coming at some point. Whether maybe it's in 2 years, maybe it's in 3 years, but having Bradbury now, you give yourself some flexibility, especially in the second and third rounds of the draft upcoming. You don't need to get a top end guy. You can get a guy that you can kind of develop and really mold to your scheme. And I think that's gives them important flexibility moving forward that, okay, if Slay isn't what he was this past year, and he has a down year, maybe they decide to move on to him next summer. And then all of a sudden you have someone already in place, and now you're not looking towards the next class and like, oh, maybe we'll get a guy next year. So I think it's like we were saying, it's kind of like defining a little bit what exactly they want to do, or maybe it's what they thought all along, is that they
Yeah.
were never really in on the top of the DB class, and they were always planning on re-signing Bradbury long term. It was just figuring out kind of the numbers and all that. So I think the Bradbury signing to me was probably, I think, the most surprising. Everyone assumed he was going to be gone, and that they were going to move on from him. But the fact that they're putting a multi-year investment in, I think that kind of speaks volumes of what he brings, and how he'll potentially fit in Sean Desai's scheme as well.
Yeah, and it's good to see all these moves. I mean, obviously, as an Eagles fan, you want to see them happen so quick, and you're like, just make it happen. I don't want to wait too long. But I'm glad that we made a lot of big decisions, especially money wise, when we had Sean Desai already. It was already, part of that room, and I'm sure he had. I don't want to say he made the decisions, but I'm sure he had a voice in a lot of these decisions to see how they would fit in his scheme. So it feels like the Eagles are making the right steps moving forward, and that's what you want to see. I mean, James Bradbury, like you said, I don't know if they ever. I think, and we talked about this even after the combine. You look at the history of the Eagles, and it's like, are they really looking at the top cornerbacks, or are they really just talking to them, doing their favorite words, due diligence on these players? So it may have never really been in their plans to look at the top of the draft for that cornerback spot. But that opens up some more questions. That opens up some more possibilities. Now, obviously, the Eagles can't keep everybody, right? So there were some key losses. The Eagles lost a lot of players. The most recent, while recording this, is Isaac Seumalo going to get his bag, which wasn't as crazy as I thought it was going to be. But in your opinion, looking at the guys that we've lost so far, I mean, off the top, you got Kaiser White, TJ Edwards, Javon Hargrave got his bag, Andre Dillard, a guy that I think was actually kind of important. When you look at all these free agents that we lost, who sticks out the most as maybe the most important? Who do you look at as a guy that maybe we lost and you're thinking that might kick ourselves in the butt down the line?
Um, Man, it's a tough one because, like, to me, I think it's really two guys that you look at that probably, like, you knew they were gonna leave, but I think um it's gonna have a bigger impact long term. I would say one is Javon Hargrave. Like, we knew that he was never going to get the money that he was looking for, but that defensive tackle room, it has to worry you a little bit because, like,
Yeah.
sure, you got Jordan Davis, Milton Williams, Fletcher Cox is back on a 1 year deal, but Hargrave, I mean, significantly outproduced those guys. Like, I know that you look at the entire defensive line as a whole. Obviously, you got Josh Sweat and Hassan Reddick too, but he was so dominant in stretches of the season that I don't want to say he almost forgot about Fletcher Cox, but he wasn't, you know, talked about as much because Hargrave dominated. So I would say he's definitely one of the signings you're like, okay, this one is gonna hurt. Even if you come bring in, a really good rookie, coming in this season, it's still gonna hurt because you're gonna have growing pains. So
Yeah.
to me, I think what they do at defensive tackle is going to be the most fascinating because you're relying on Jordan Davis, who didn't play uh, a ton of snaps. Like he got some time on the field, but not nearly as you might have thought. And then Milton Williams is still kind of a work in progress. Fletcher Cox, what does he have left in the tank? So I worry a little bit about defensive tackle, and to me that probably signals they're definitely drafting one for sure, and potentially one of those first round picks. And the other one is TJ Edwards. That I was like, I know kind of his story, like a former UDFA guy, someone that wasn't really expected to be the top guy, but like as much as people say linebackers replaceable, you can't replace chemistry and what they were able to do. Even though they didn't have the top end linebacker talent, they still did a really, really good job in him to be able to get his money and go off to Chicago now. I think he's going to really help that team kind of in their transition mode. Same thing, he helped the Eagles into their transition from being a borderline playoff team to a Super Bowl contender. So I think those two guys to me kind of really stick out. I think Andre Dillard too a little bit because to me, I think people aren't talking about enough that well, sure, we're going to eventually lose Kelsey, but Lane Johnson is openly said that he only wants to play a couple more years. So
Yeah.
losing Dillard, I mean, that's a death piece. And Johnson dealt with the core body injury as well towards the end of the season and even into the playoffs. So I think those three positions to me are the biggest ones that have to be addressed, I think, in this draft period, because linebacker wise, I think they'll be okay. They're gonna have Nakobe Dean, obviously, there, but you still need kind of that veteran presence too. So I think they're gonna be a little bit, I won't say aggressive, but certainly they're going to be looking to bring in, a veteran linebacker, even if it's like a short-term deal, like they did with Greedy and Rashad Penny. But I think those three positions for sure are ones that I'm left with. Like they're probably going to address this year, just
Yeah, they're gonna
because
have to.
of the time is not on your side. And I mean, if you already take a peek ahead, I mean, linebacker class probably is better next year, but the tackle class, I mean, you got to get one now, because I mean, you look at the right tackles they got out there. I mean, we know, we both know, we both love DeJuan Jones, so I'm just saying that's it's a
At
possibility.
30, it makes sense. At 30, I mean, it really does. There's a lot of guys. I know me and you go back and forth about a couple of different guys that, whether it was at the combine or whether it was just on our own research. And we go back, but there's a lot of options, especially our offensive line and where we're sitting. I don't want to say like throughout all 7 rounds, you're going to get a starter, but there's a lot of options where we're sitting that you can trade around, you can sit and pick, you can get yourself a really good tackle, a guy that can move at that guard spot. I think Andre Dillard is a perfect example of what you said. I mean, we saw him even show the ability to go ahead and play guard when Landon Dickerson was down, a couple of times. And that was big. I think a lot of people don't give, we all look back at that, 1 or 2 game span where he played poorly at the right tackle spot and just, we stamped that as who he was as a player. And I just think it was a little bit unfair, but he went out there, he's getting a bag. He is getting a good amount of money. So that wasn't going to happen with the Eagles. I definitely agree with you. And I think that there's a lot of, I don't want to say misinformation, but I think a lot of people are misinformed when they think that offensive line is off the board at number 10. I think that it's maybe the exact opposite. I think that they're looking, they're looking at either offensive line or defensive line, in my opinion. And even going deeper than that, I think that you look at this free agency and what the Eagles have done, and I think that cements that. You look at what they've done with, retaining the veterans in the cornerback room. Hopefully we get some news about Gardner Johnson, which we'll talk about in a minute. But you see that they're trying to keep the guys at positions that they don't necessarily do well at, especially in drafting. Because you look at, like you said, Alex Singleton kind of worked his way. I mean, TJ Edwards worked his way up with the Eagles, but you can look at a guy like Alex Singleton. They've had a lot of success with mid-round linebackers. They seem to have success there. Offensive, defensive line, they have a lot of success there. In your opinion, what does this free agency tell you about the Eagles draft plans? Has it shaped the Eagles draft plans at all, in your opinion, so far?
I think it kind of cements that they were always looking at trench play as kind of the king. To me, I think when you factor in just how much trenches have been important to the Eagles, for cements that they want to invest in that. And I think they feel confident, certainly want to add some more people to it, some other guys, but look at every other move they made. Like, they've given these short-term deals to DB and running back, but we know that they're probably going to draft one of those positions in the mid rounds or on day 3. So to me, it leaves room for that first rounds. Like, you're probably going after trenches in the first round. And I kind of had an inkling they might do that, just based on who they were expected to lose with Dillard and Selemanu as well. But to me, with those guys leaving and then they're really not signing anyone per se in the market, to me, I think that speaks to how good the offensive line class is or could be. But we also know they value versatility. So we have to know that if they're selecting the offensive lineman, it's probably someone that either has dual tackle ability or can play in the interior as well. And they like to mix and match pieces. They like guys that can play 2 or 3 positions. That's the reason they took Landon Dickerson a couple of years ago, why they took Cam Jurgens, and why he could be his starting guard next year. Lane Johnson was a left tackle out of Oklahoma and played right tackle for the Eagles for over a decade. So it's like those kind of tidbits, you look at what they've done over the years and how they built the trenches, and they have Stoutland's watching film with Matthew Bergeron, at the combine. They're bringing DeJuan Jones and Paris Johnson in on top 30 visits. So to me, it's like, it's getting to a point where, to me, if you're ignoring the signs that they're probably going offensive line in the first round, they're kind of silently screaming it, if that makes sense. Like,
yeah, it does.
To me, it just feels like that's where it's headed. And like, they always draft ahead of what their needs are that year. And there's been some great articles, some people have been writing, that I've kind of been interacting with, that it kind of shows that over the years. They didn't have a defensive end need, but then they drafted Derek Barnett, and I forgot, I think it was Chris Long that was the defensive end, and he left the next year. So it's like they set these things up to where they're looking ahead before they even have those contract talks, before they have someone about to hit free agency. They're always looking ahead and planning ahead. So to me, I think it definitely says they want offensive line and defensive line as well, because you could lose one of Josh Sweat or Hassan Reddick next year. So then all of a sudden, probably defensive line edge, and we know the lack of depth right now in the defensive line right now, along the defensive line. So the trench play, to me, especially if like you're a team of that level, and Kansas City is probably going to do the same thing, reinvest in the trenches. So to me, I think it kind of is like signaling around the league, like, hey, like, our skill positions are good, and we know that, but we want to continue to kind of build for down the line. I think the moves they made in free agency kind of solidify that. Like, they've left those spots open, and they want to bring in young guys that they can come in and develop. And and that's how you win multiple years. You don't spend the big money on guys that may be here for a couple years and then move on. They like those short term investments that they can move off of, or they like to develop their own guys. And I mean, you look at every guy on the offensive line, it's been developed in house.
Yeah. I think that's the perfect way of putting it, is that they're silently screaming that, especially trench play. I mean, we all know, what we want as fans. We all know what the fans want, right? They want those big names, but you're 100% right. That's how we're continuously in the playoff hunt. We're continuously, at least competitive, because you win at the trenches. That's what it really comes down to.
Eagles fans everywhere, this is for you.
Yeah. Fly Eagles flying on the team. Touchdown. Time to get Jalen this ring. You don't really want to start a thing. This a Bird Gang Nation, baby. It's a Philly thing. Hater, and you looking like you type trash. I'm just here calling on Philly the podcast. And we can call a man dog, or watch Miles score off the handoff. Rest of the division, your man saw Jackson like Sean, hunting like Randolph. Season hit, early time to do him in. Your boy Philly Fresco. Thanks for tuning in.